Right, so let's have a go at ABRSM Grade 5. This is an exam that lots of people often take in the UK and other places around the world where people study for the ABRSM exams. It's quite a good one to take because if you pass your Associated Board Grade 5, it means that you can go off and do practical grades 6, 7 and 8 on your instrument. So if you want to go beyond grade 5 on playing the piano or playing the violin or playing the trumpet, then you need to do grade 5 theory just to show that you haven't just learnt how to play your instrument technically, but also that you've developed a little bit of an understanding as to how music works. And that's exactly what we do on this site, so it's really good, even if you're not doing any practical exams, to just have a go at maybe these tests as a way to see how you're getting on and how your understanding of music is developing. Once again, I've got this paper from musictheoryhelp.co.uk. Their website seems to be broken at the moment. I might send them an email to see if they will fix it, because they have a really good selection of practice papers, and the papers also come with answers as well, which is really helpful. My recommendation probably again for this grade 5 paper, particularly if you are preparing for the exam yourself, is to maybe download the paper if I can get them to fix the website, and then have a try and see if you can answer these questions, and then watch me have a go at them and see how my answers and your answers match up. So as always, let's have a good read of these questions and let's have a go at grade 5 theory. Okay, so it says this paper contains 8 questions, all of which should be answered. The time allowed is 2 hours. Hopefully we won't need 2 hours together. Question 1 says the following extract, which begins on the first beat of the bar, requires 2 different time signatures, one at the start of the first and third bar. Write in 2 appropriate time signatures. So this is a piece of music which isn't completely in a regular time, in as much as there are some pieces where there's just 4 beats in every bar and the whole piece works out that way with 4 beats in every bar. Other pieces, composers choose to change the time signature for a particular rhythmic effect or something they need to do in the music, and so we need to kind of be aware of that as we're playing and performing music. So here it's asking us to try and work out what the time signature is here, and just like every other question, this is starting to look a little bit more complicated, perhaps with a few more complicated rhythms to work out, but it's exactly the same process that we go through to try and work out what the time signature is, and that is to try and turn these faster notes, these sort of quite quick notes, into maybe crotchet beats. I think the first thing to do is just to see whether the music happens to work out into crotchet beats, because that's going to give us an idea that this music is probably in some kind of simple time. In other words, a time signature with a 4 or a 2 at the bottom, so like 4-4 or 3-4 or 2-2, something like that. If it doesn't quite work out so easily into crotchets and it's looking more like we're grouping our beats into dotted crotchets, and that's obviously suggesting some kind of compound time signature like 6-8 or 9-8 or 12-8. Now, looking at this straight away, I think we're not going to be dealing with a compound time signature, mainly just because the beats look like they're grouped into crotchet beats. And a good clue is this one here, because even if our understanding of rhythmic notation is not the best in the world, most of us could work out that here we have 2 quavers or eighth notes, and these 2 are going to add up together to give us 1 crotchet beat. So this is 1 crotchet beat here. Now what else is going on in this bar? Now if we can work out this rhythm, this takes care of this group of notes and this group of notes, because if you can see, they're actually the same rhythm. So what is going on exactly here? Well, we have a dotted quaver or a dotted eighth note, and we have 2 what are these? Demi-semi-quavers. So these are quite quick notes in the music. And let's just see if we can work out how much time we would need to fit in all of these notes. So a quaver is normally half a beat. So that's relatively straightforward. But we've got a dot here next to our quaver, and that normally means we're going to add on half of that time again. So this is half a beat plus a quarter of a beat. So we've got 3/4 of a crotchet beat taken up by this dotted quaver. And then we've got these 2 demi-semi-quavers or 30-second notes. And these are pretty quick notes, and they add up to 1 semi-quaver or a quarter of a crotchet beat. So if we take all of these notes together, I think we're going to have a half plus a quarter plus a quarter. And so this figure here, this dotted quaver and 2 demi-semi-quavers, is going to add up to 1 crotchet beat. And What's lovely about this particular melody is the rhythm's kind of repeated, so we don't need to work that one out, that's exactly the same, and that gives us another crotchet beat. So this is going rather well. Now let's just see if we can work out this one, and then we should be able to make a good guess as to what time signature we're dealing with here. So we have this triplet thing. Let's not worry too much about the triplet thing to start with. The easier bit of this is the fact that there is a quaver here, which is half a beat. If we're talking about crotchet beats, and I think at this point we kind of are, because the rest of the bar seems to be broken down into crotchets. And so we just need to work out this triplet thing. Now, of course, a triplet is just where we fit 3 notes of a particular length into the space of 2 of those particular notes. So we have a triplet semiquaver here. So triplet semiquavers, 3 semiquavers, and we're going to fit those 3 semiquavers into the space that we would normally fit 2 semiquavers. And 2 semiquavers added together, so this is almost the same, well, it is exactly the same, in fact, as this kind of rhythm. If we'd have seen this, it probably would have been much easier. We wouldn't think twice about this. We would look at that and we would see our quaver added on and we go, oh, that's easy, that's just a crotchet, right? That's just 2 semiquavers which add up to half a beat and a quaver which adds up to half a beat. So together, those are going to be 1 crotchet. So it turns out that even though this is quite a nasty, but a complex and maybe slightly unusual looking rhythm, it turns out that when we sit down with it and we work out what's going on in the rhythm, it's as simple as basically it could be. And we have 4 crotchet beats in a bar, and that means that this is a standard bar of 4/4, which is something we see all the time in music. And so this actually is quite regular, as it turns out, in terms of a rhythm. There are much more irregular time signatures that it could have been, 5/4, 7/4, but this is pretty standard. And the next bar is the same. If we go through, we can actually see that figure again lots of times, this same one from before. We see that again here. 2 quavers, which add up to 1 crotchet beat again, another crotchet beat here with this figure, and another crotchet beat here with this figure. So that's another bar of 4/4, so we don't really need another time signature there. But we do need another one here because, well, not only has it left us a nice gap and it tells us about it in the question, but if we're to work out the amount of time needed to play these notes, we're not going to have enough. We're going to have enough sort of time used up to fill a whole bar of 4/4. So we have these 2 groups of 4 semiquavers, and hopefully this is relatively straightforward because we know that 4 semiquavers take 1 crotchet beat to play. And so we have that there and we have that there. And so really there's no other conclusion that we can come to, no other answer that we can come to that other than this, which is that this bar has a time signature of 2/4. In other words, saying there are 2 crotchet beats worth of time in this bar. And so even though we were dealing with some quite fast notes, some demi-semiquavers and semiquavers and triplet semiquavers, this music is actually in a relatively regular time signature. It might have been just that he didn't want as many beats in that bar for whatever reason, and that's why Mahler at this point chose to write a bar of 2/4 instead of a bar of 4/4, which is what he'd been doing before. So that is question 1A, part 1, taken care of quite easily, hopefully. And so let's move on to part 2, which is asking us to write as semibrieves or whole notes the 2 enharmonic equivalents of the first note of the first bar. Okay, so this is normally the bit that trips people up, this enharmonic bit, and enharmonic just means sounds the same. So you might play a middle C on a viola and a middle C on a piano, and those would be considered enharmonic in that there's different instruments playing that note, but ultimately it is the same note, it's the same pitch. The air is vibrating at exactly the same speed, and so that's how we think of these things as being enharmonic or sounding the same. So it's asking us really to write some other notes into this score down here that will sound the same as this E, but are not an E. And so there's a couple of things we can do to write some notes that sound like this. We can write a D double sharp, and this is where, well, a D sharp, that's not very good. A D double sharp is a D with a cross next to it like that, and that's just saying this is not a D sharp, this is a D double sharp, which is 1 semitone sharper than a D sharp. So putting a sharp sign next to a D moves the note from a normal D as a white note on the piano to the next black note to the right. That would be a D sharp. A D double sharp moves that note up another semitone. So we go from basically D sharp to E, but we call that note a D double sharp, and so that's how we get this idea that these are enharmonic, because it will sound the same as an E, but this is a D double sharp. It's a different way of writing an E, which is exactly what this question wants. It wants its enharmonic equivalent. And there's another one we can do as well. This one perhaps more straightforward, because there's something we can do to an F that will make that F sound the same as the E that we have here. And that will be to make this an F flat. So if I write a flat sign in front of this F, the sound that we would hear if we were to play that note on the piano or the violin would be the same as the E that we see in the first bar of our example up here. And that's, again, why we can consider that F flat to be an enharmonic equivalent of the E that we see at the start of the extract. So that is part A taken care of. Part B is asking for some of these, technical questions, and it's asking for little details maybe from the score. Yeah, so this is kind of the point where if you know this stuff, you're going to know it. There's not such an easy way to just kind of figure it out by being really smart. The way to find out these sorts of things is to just go and have a look at lots of orchestral scores, and when you see something in that score that you're maybe not familiar with, just go on the internet, because the internet is a wonderful thing. It will tell you what these things mean, and over time you'll develop a sense of the sorts of things you might see written on a violin part, or the sorts of things you might see written on a flute part, for example. All these different techniques that are specific to a certain instrument, we can learn about those. Even if we don't play those instruments, it's good for us to know how a violin works and the sorts of things that we might see written in a violin part. That's a really important thing for any musician to know, I think, particularly if you ever think about writing music for string instruments. It's silly, for example, to, put breath marks into a violin part, because of course violinists, they do breathe, of course, but they don't need to breathe in association with their sound, so they can continue playing and breathing at the same time. So a violin can play forever. You can ask them just to play a note that lasts forever. If you ask a flute player to play a note that lasts forever, eventually they'll turn a colour of green and then purple and then fall on the floor. So you need to make sure, of course, when you're writing for the flute, that you give them a chance to breathe. Violin, not such an important thing to consider, but there are other things to consider, like which direction you'd like the violinist's bow to go in, and all of these different things. So that's one of the skills you must learn as you become maybe a musician that's more of a general musician and not just a piano player or a trumpet player or a singer. That you know things about all the instruments that you might write music for, you might be playing music with. And I think that helps you to become a better sort of all-round musician. So let's see if we can work out some of these. Hopefully they're nothing that I haven't seen before. So I know this first one. It says, give the meaning of the term arco. Now, as a viola player myself, I see this all the time in music. And when we see arco, it just means play with the bow. And the opposite of arco, so we might see something in the music that says pizzicato. And when we see pizzicato, that means it's time to put the bow down and start plucking the strings instead, and that's the different sound that string instruments can make, that kind of plucked sound versus the maybe more standard sound of playing with the bow. And that's what we want here when we see arco in the score. This is obviously after a bit of the music perhaps where people have been playing with their fingers and plucking the string. Here in this section that we've just come to, it's asking the player to play with the bow. Part 2, it says, suggest an instrument for which this extract could have been written. Well, if you know that first one, then this second one is pretty easy, because it's saying there's not many instruments that use bows. It's probably going to be a violin, I would say. You might get away with viola, and you might get away with cello, I suppose. But most likely, if it's treble clef, you see the thing's written in treble clef, so probably it's going to be a violin. And that takes us to the end of question 1. I will see you in question 2.